As a youngster, I had no idea what my aims in life were, but if I like to go back to my early days in primary school, I suppose most of the games we ever played were sword fights, bows and arrows, playing cowboys and Indians. That would be our life back in the early 30s. I had created a small interest that maybe one day I might be interested in joining the forces, either the Army or the Navy. It also transgressed as we got a little older that the Governor-General was coming to South Australia for his first visit, and the government wanted to put on a great display, and they wanted to have a lot of stories about the sailors and singing the old sea chanties on the Adelaide Oval. Yes, what shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor early in the morning? So Mum made me a sailor suit. I enjoyed the day out on the Adelaide Oval singing chanties. But just prior to this, of course, when I was 10, my brother had joined the Navy at 13. So my added interest, of course, in the Navy was caused by my brother, and he spent 4 years in the Naval College, and he became what was called Chief Cadet Captain, in other words, Head Prefect. But he didn't complete his 4th year because the war broke out, and they shifted the whole year off to sea as cadet midshipmen before they were given commissions. After that, I went from primary school to the high school, which I spent 1 year at the Woodville High School. I was put in the B stream class, and I never met such a bunch of larrikins that suited my lifestyle, because I was a larrikin. We even used to play cricket with the schoolmaster who'd come out at lunchtime and enjoy our company. So overall, it was a very good year for me and a lot of the class boys. But we were a bit of a larrikin mob. It was after this was completed, my father decided I needed a slightly better education, and he sent me off to a private school called Prince Alfred College, to which I attended for just a fraction over 4 years. Well, during my time at Prince Alfred College, of course, I discovered they had a cadet corps. The whole school, except those who would play scouts or wanted to do art, you had to join the cadet corps. So you wore a nice brown grey uniform with red stripes down the leg, and you looked quite dignified and smart in our uniform. So being a keen fellow, I attended the Saturday morning classes to learn to become an NCO, a non-commissioned officer. And I stayed there for 3 years, and eventually I reached the heights of a sergeant major. And by this time we didn't have any cadet officers left, and in my 3rd year, one of the school teachers who had been promoted to a captain as a commander, he said to me, "I'm promoting you to an acting cadet lieutenant, Nichols." But one must remember this was in 43, you might say in the last 2 or 3 years of the war. And therefore most of our troops had been fighting over in the Middle East. Our Air Force was fighting in Britain, and our Navy was right through the Mediterranean, the Atlantic Ocean and Indian Ocean and the North Sea. So I was still pretty keen to do my bit. I just wanted to be there. So I volunteered. I had a bit of a fight with my parents over this because they thought because my brother had already been there for 3 or 4 years of the war, that why should their second son go? So I nagged them all over the Christmas period. They finally signed my papers from memory in January 43. And I joined the Navy because under all the forces, it's the quickest way to see any action if it's going to be. Because in the Navy, you go and do 3 months in the Navy depot, doing basic training and marching, using a rifle, learning a bit of the language of the sea, and you spend the rest of your time learning while you're at sea, and that doesn't change even today. Where do you do your training? You do it at sea. After I called up, I hopped on the train at the Addo railway station. No one came to see me off. I didn't want them to see me off. I wasn't feeling emotional at all, but I went over to what we call Melbourne, hopped another train to Flinders Naval Depot, which they also called HMAS Cerberus, so we wore the cap, HMAS Cerberus. We lined up the first day, and the petty officer in charge said he wants a class leader. No one volunteered till one of my friends. He opened up and volunteered Stan Nichols because he's an ex-sergeant major. So suddenly I'm voted in whether I liked it or not. So the day started off where I had to line the whole class up, and there is a picture of me in my little badge on my arm which says 54 class, and I marched them everywhere. The petty officer found out I was a good trainer, having had nearly 4 years of it in the Army Cadets. So I was constantly training them rifle drill and any other drill associated with weapons, and I marched them all around the depot to every function that we had to witness. So after this basic training was all over, after 3 months, a letter went around but sort of looking for people who may be interested in getting a commission. So I volunteered my name and applied to enter the officers training school that's called the OTS. That was a 16-week course, which once again we were put through all the sorts of training that you can imagine that one could be put through. We did navigation, we did flags, we did normal seamanship, we touched on a little bit of gunnery. We even spent 1 month on a ship called the Bingara, where I was allowed to fire one shell, 1 4-inch shell. And it didn't hit the target on my head, so I could see I wasn't being marked down as a gunnery officer. So that never occurred. I never found out. Well, after this training, we all did our final examination in navigation, and I think all of us were successful, even though we never really got the results. They're a little strange in Navy ways about telling you any more than they have to. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we were called up before Commander James, and all he said was, "Nichols, Scully, Urquhart, you're on draft tomorrow, AM 0600. Well, being me, I couldn't help myself. "Sir, I'd like to know why we weren't successful." And all he did was repeat it again. "Nichols, Scully and Urquhart, you're on draft at 0600 AM tomorrow morning." And that was it. The fourth man who didn't get it, Bob Spicer, he was already a petty officer. But he's what's called a round rig petty officer. He hadn't finished his time. So they promoted him and squared him off so he could wear round rig uniforms. The round rig are the officers because they wrap their jacket around themselves. They wear a coat. We wear the square rig because everything else is squared off with your collar, etc., etc. Next morning we left the depot, and the thing that annoyed me, I had no chance to get any money out of the bank. All I had in my wallet was 10 shillings, and I'm being sent up north to join the Shropshire. I had been appointed to the HMAS Gascoigne, which is my brother's ship. My brother was the first lieutenant, in other words, second in charge of the Gascoigne, but they found out that they would not permit Australians to have relations in the same ship. And this all resulted from the huge calamity on one of the American cruisers that got torpedoed and sank, where 5 brothers all died on the one trip. And that was a really disgusting state of affairs, that one family got wiped out in one blow. So I was sent to the HMAS Shropshire instead. Anyhow, we got on the train, we cruised all the way through up to Brisbane. The train wasn't too bad, except we were overcrowded. As you can imagine, in dog boxes, as we used to call them, we had to be seating for about 8 people. There were 12 of us jammed in. There were fellas lying on the floor, sleeping on suitcases, you name it. It was pretty cramped up. So we get to Brisbane. Because I had no money, I took on being on the naval patrol, which is the same as the military police. And I said to Urquhart and Scully, because they were both Queenslanders, I tell you what, if you do the sub for me when I'm in Adelaide, knowing this was never going to happen, I'll sub for you and I'll take over your time on the naval patrol. So I became permanent Navy patrol for a fortnight, 2 weeks. And one of the most interesting interludes was that we had to pick up any drunk on the street after 10 o'clock. There was a fight between an American and a silly sailor who drew a knife on him, and the American shot him, so that caused a bit of a ruckus, as you can imagine. So at 10 p.m. at night, no drunks permitted on the street at all. So we went across the Story Bridge in Brisbane, and just on the other side, down one or two of the back lanes, there was a house with about 8-foot wooden fence around it. It was a brothel. And there was this queue of 20 or 30 fellas lined up, sitting on seats waiting their turn. And guess what? The Aussies were selling their spots to the Americans at $20 a throw. Come and take my seat. Then they'd get on the end of the queue again and start up. Anyhow, we're only 18, us 4 kids with a very junior officer. We had to get the drunks out of the brothel. So my first time ever in a brothel, the madam left us in and she didn't like it at all. No doors or curtains, just beads on the door. And there was this fellow, with his socks on still, going his hardest. And the officer said, "Get him off." We both, 4 of us, went in, 2 each side, hoisted him off the woman, took him outside and dumped him in the truck. It was just like that. Well, I don't think the officer knew really what he was doing. Himself, it must have got the shock of his life. However, we thought it was very bloody funny, believe you me. I've been telling that story for years. I can still see the bloke with his black socks on, with his feet getting all excited. It really was a sight to believe. Anyway, after that we did leave Brisbane on a goods train. They converted steel trucks with 3-tier bunks inside, with a 5-gallon ex-paint container for your urinal in the middle of the floor. However, you could get out and walk faster than the train. So most of us never used the bucket because you could run and catch up to the train. But then we arrived in Townsville. But the best part, as we walked down to get onto the ship, we went past a place, a prison, which held women. And the women were sticking their heads out of the prison windows when they saw us sailors. I suppose there were about 10 of us. And did they give us a right royal raspberry? I can't remember all the disgusting words they referred to us as, but we copped a lot. It was really an eye-opener. So anyhow, we got onto the SS Taruna, a very small freight ship. We used to do the trip between Melbourne and Tassie before this. We got on there, and our first interlude of fighting with authorities, when an army officer came up to both Urquhart, myself and Scully, said, "You're both on cookhouse duty." I said, "You got it wrong. We're from the officers' training school." Now that wasn't a lie, was it? I didn't say we got kicked out. And we're on our way to join the heavy cruiser HMAS Shropshire. Well, he got the hint. He didn't come near us again. We got fed like the rest of the troops, but the only dirty deal he did to us is to put our spot for hanging our hammocks, starboard side, forward, right out in the open, so when the wind blew and the rain blew, the hammock didn't save you at all. You copped the lot. So how we did enjoy that little victory anyway, because neither of us liked the bloke telling us you're on cookhouse duty. So the day we arrived in Milne Bay, there was the ship, 30 feet from the water level to the upper deck, and all the superstructures up higher. And that went up the total height of the ship to the top of the mast was 120 feet. It looked positively massive. The HMAS Shropshire, or I should say the HMS Shropshire, was brought into being. It was the population of the county of Shropshire that we call in Australia, that raised for £6 million, and keeping in mind that Shropshire is a land-based county. The Shropshire was classified as a London class cruiser, even though it was named after a county. It was a little bit longer, a little bit narrower, and a little bit faster than the other county class cruisers. And they built something, I think it was about 11 in total of the county class type cruiser. But strange as it may seem, she was seen to be kept down the bottom end of the Atlantic Ocean or in the Indian Ocean a lot. Well, the sad case came, there was a battle in Guadalcanal when the Japanese attacked, caught in the middle of the night, and they sank 4 cruisers. HMAS Canberra was sunk, the 3 American cruisers were sunk, so we needed another heavy cruiser. We only had the Aussie left. It was discovered when they gave the ship to Australia, free of anything, by Mr. Churchill. It turns out that one of the bearings was seizing up on one of her propellers, and she could not steam at full speed. It could only do about 20 odd knots, where normally full speed was 32.6 knots. That our chief engineer and an ERA were looking at the bearings on this particular tail shaft, and they found it was marked incorrectly. So the Australian blokes changed it all. And after that we cruised round carrying out its maximum speed of 32.6 knots. So eventually when we got to Shropshire, she was completely rearmed by the Brits and by the Australians as they brought her back to Australia. The Shropshire was granted the Australian Navy in, I think it was October 42, but it wasn't commissioned as an Australian ship, and I think it was April 1943. They went into action later that year towards Christmas up at Cape Gloucester. I did not join her until the Admiralty Islands. The ship is divided up amongst seamen into 4 areas: forecastle, foretop, maintop and quarterdeck. The maintop and foretop, by the way, are right bang slap in the middle of the ship. The forecastle, of course, is really the sharp end. The quarterdeck is where the officers live. The ship was designed to take 760 men. When I joined it, she was nearly 1,100 men. So our job as seamen, ordinary seamen, all we did was scrub decks. So you'd start at 6 in the morning and you'd walk up and down pretending to scrub the deck, mopping it up, and even getting on your hands and knees with separate rags, mopping up little holes. You have to scrub out the toilets so nothing is missed. You do the whole lot, the deck, the bulkheads, the deck heads, everything. And you've got to dry it all off, down to the last drop, believe you me. And if you've got 2 hours to do it, and there's about 80 of you to do it, and you know they only need about 10, you do it over and over again till everything's shining. And that was just to keep you busy. Some of us really got a bit browned off with this, but you know, in the end I accepted the fact that, believe it or not, I became a fairly tolerant sort of bloke to doing these duties which I thought were just plain damn silly at any rate. I did that for 2 or 3 months, and then a commander left the ship and a new bloke called George Oldham came on board. Now, to tell you the rank of a commander on board any cruiser, he's the second in charge. He runs the ship for the captain. I became his runner and messenger. I had to be properly dressed every day. My socks had to be pulled up tight, so I had to dress properly. The only thing I think I disappointed him in that I didn't have a full sailor's uniform. You couldn't buy them out of the mess. I used to wear an open neck shirt. Anyway, he never said anything, so for the 6 months I was his runner. And believe you me, he was most helpful. Strange as it may seem, I didn't find out till later that he was a South Australian, where I came from. So after I'd spent my 6 months with Commander Oldham, I went back to part of ship for about, I think it was 1 or 2 months. I don't think that the Chief Petty Officer in the maintop division liked me. He sent me on my first job down into one of the large motor cruisers, and so I was down over the ship's side with the thing moored to the ship, and it was bobbing up and down the whole time I had there, head down, arse up, scrubbing planks of wood to get the stains out with lime. Well, I've never vomited so much in my life before. I just couldn't move for being sick. Even though I appealed to him that I'd had enough, I had to stay there the whole bloody 4 hours. I was then told I had to climb up the rope, but I thought any minute, the way I was feeling, I was going to drop down and kill myself in the bottom of the boat. But I got up there and some kindly bloke leant over and grabbed the rope and pulled me into the side of the ship, and I got in. But he didn't do that to me again, I must admit. But I did come good, and within another month after, I was then made Navigator's Yeoman for 6 months. Mr. Gallatley was the navigator at the time, and he was a Lieutenant Commander, and he was a very nice fellow. He taught me how to, apart from what I learned at the OTS, taught me how to mark them properly on the chart. And funny thing about it, I had my own rolling ruler that my brother had given me, hoping I might get a commission. So I kept it with me because I needed it if I became a navigator. So I plotted all the ships sunk and anything else the commander wanted on their reports to make sure. But I didn't do the work when we were in action bombarding. That was out of the question. He needed a more qualified sub-lieutenant or lieutenant to do his work. So I did that for 6 months, and then I got a new Navigator's Yeoman, a Commander Mesley. And he was a ripper. My action station was on the starboard side of the bridge, and I heard Commander Mesley say to this snotty, "Snotty, get your thumb out of your bum and get on with your job." Well, the inevitable occurred. I burst out laughing. He was all deadly serious. "You think that's funny, do you, Nichols?" And instead of saying, "No, sir," being very truthful, I said, "Yes, sir." Well, that went down like a lead balloon. He hardly spoke to me for the next week or two. He did come round in the end, and we got on pretty well. After my 6 months with him, I was the weatherman's assistant, and I worked with him for the rest of the war, doing his weather charts. I never forecast anything, naturally, because my job was to draw up the chart with the isobars. He would do the forecasting. Until right at the end when he left the ship, I've got to say this last bit, it was in Tokyo Bay. This bloody storm came up, and the navigator, who was also acting as the weatherman, because the weatherman had left the ship, he said to me, "What do you think the weather's like, Nichols?" I said, "We're in for a big blow, sir." That's all I said. He dropped another anchor on the strength of that, so we didn't run ashore. A couple of American ships, by the way, ran ashore. They hadn't got steam up before the wind hit them. He didn't say congratulations or give me a mention in dispatches or anything, but I thought it was pretty good. So I remained as a weatherman's yeoman right until I left the ship in Sydney Harbour in 1945.